I'm 58 now, but for most of my adult life I was a woman who always put everyone else's needs before her own. I was the type who never learned to say no, the kind of person who sacrificed whatever little she had, so those close to her could have more. For over 3 decades I lived for my son, David, and for my husband, Mark. I dropped all my dreams and ambitions and made their lives my sole purpose. If you had asked me then, I wouldn't have called it sacrifice. It was just how life was supposed to be. David was born when I was 25, and from that moment, everything shifted. I was a graphic designer by trade, having studied art and design in college. But once he arrived, I quit my job to care for him, full-time. That wasn't a difficult choice at first. I felt the mother's instinct to nurture and protect. But as David grew older, the sacrifices piled up. When he was in middle school, Mark's job became unstable, and I took up several part-time jobs to keep the bills paid, working nights at a diner, cleaning houses during the day, sometimes both on the same day. I never told them how exhausted I was. I didn't want to add to their worries. I gave up a career that once made me proud. I let go of my art shows, my freelance gigs, even the friends I used to see once in a while. Invitations to social events started to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. Every weekend I was ironing school uniforms, packing lunches, and rushing to David's soccer games. The community saw me as a devoted mother and wife, dependable and forever present. But inside I was slowly fading. I normalized my constant tiredness, the ache in my back, and a lingering sadness that didn't seem to have a name. I told myself it was just motherhood, that being needed more than anything else was the reward. My emotional needs were buried deep, almost forgotten. I never sought praise or acknowledgement. In fact, I shied away from compliments. I thought needing anything for myself was selfish. Love came in the form of thank you, but only when I had already done something big, unseen most days. I neglected my health, always putting a Band-Aid on deeper wounds. The dreams of who I might have been, if given the chance, were like old photos, stashed in a drawer, faded, barely looked at. Financially, we were never well off. Mark's income barely covered our expenses. Sometimes we dipped into savings, which was nearly non-existent. Credit card debt mounted quietly, and I managed it all without complaints. My son received the best I could provide with the means we had. Food on the table, school supplies, clothes. But it was a fragile balancing act. No matter how hard I worked, the future looked uncertain. To the outside world, I was the pillar of stability and warmth. Teachers, neighbors, and church members often said I was a wonderful woman or a saint. But in the solitude of my nights, I wrestled with loneliness and a sense of invisibility. I saw myself as a shadow behind the success and happiness of my family. I was the constant helper, but never the helped, a woman invisible to her own desires. There were moments, small but piercing, that haunted me from time to time. Like when David graduated high school, I stood backstage at the ceremony, watching him receive scholarship offers and applause. I smiled, but I was alone in the crowd. Mark whispered something proud to him, but not a word to me. I remembered thinking, am I just the air around him? Something invisible, unnoticed. Another day that lodged itself in my memory was the small argument between Mark and me over something trivial. Dinner plans. I suggested we go somewhere special, and he dismissed the idea, saying, "You don't need anything fancy." I swallowed the disappointment and agreed, feeling like my needs didn't even register as real. Our house mirrored this emotional landscape. It was modest, rooms filled with second-hand furniture, worn but clean. Walls adorned with David's school pictures and awards, but none celebrated me. The kitchen was where I spent most time, a place of endless preparation and cleanup, where my laughter was often forced and tired. The living room held a couch with sagging cushions and a television that was more often off than on. This was the space where my sacrifices lived, a house full of love that did not include me. I never thought about what I wanted beyond the next meal, the next appointment, or the next school event. My own voice was drowned in chores and responsibilities. Life was a series of giving and neglecting without complaint. I had become a ghost in my own story. The night of the event was colder than I expected, and the hall buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses that felt alien to me. The laughter echoed loud, but it wasn't for me. I stood near the back, the hum of conversations flowing past like a current I couldn't swim in. The smell of expensive perfumes mixed oddly with the scent of cheap plastic cups and spilled wine, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Every smile that caught me was a brief, cutting reminder of how invisible I'd become. I felt my legs tremble slightly, that familiar, creeping nausea rising in my chest. My hands clenched into fists to stop them from shaking. My mouth was dry, tongue heavy. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came in uneven gasps, rattling in my throat like a whispered confession. Who did I even think I was here? They didn't see me. Except for a couple of polite nods, cold and brief, they might as well have been invisible. I could catch the half-whispered comments about me, the subtle shifts in their posture as people stepped around me. The very people whom I'd sacrificed everything for, who owed me thanks, or at least respect, treated me like a ghost that deserved nothing more than a passing glance. The music swelled, a band playing upbeat tunes I couldn't connect to. Dance floor lights twisted colors across the room, reflecting the smiles on faces that didn't want me there. And then I saw him, the man I had devoted years of my life to, standing like a king among courtiers. He glanced in my direction. Barely. There was no warmth, no recognition, only a flicker of irritation that I dared show up to this gathering. His new wife beside him noticed me too, and exchanged a quick, disdainful look. Those few seconds stretched endlessly. I felt my skin crawl, sweat beading at my brow despite the chill. My heart pounded like a warning drum, each beat screaming to retreat, to vanish beneath the floor. Instead, I stood there rigid, smiles plastered onto indifferent faces, like masks at a masquerade I was no longer invited to. I remembered back to a phone call just weeks ago, a hurried thank you for something I barely recognized, a promise broken the moment I showed up here, to stand in the background, silent, invisible. Another memory flickered, a Christmas dinner where my sacrifices went unnoticed, a forgotten gift left unopened. Suddenly, a sharp remark cut through the hum. Why is she even here? Pretending she's still part of the family. It was low but crisp, and I caught the slight smirk on a sibling's face. Others chuckled, their eyes sliding over me like I was a stain on their otherwise polished evening. Yeah, didn't she leave us all to pick up the pieces? Another voice whispered, cruel and satisfied. Should just be grateful she's not causing a scene, said a third, eyes alight with malice. I did not cry, but I did step back, every inch of my body screaming to crumble. Inside, I felt hollowed out, an echo of herself left behind. The laughter, the music, even the chatter about goals and dreams. It was all a world that didn't have room for me. Only one person noticed. A quiet guest on the outskirts caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, a small gesture of empathy that stung with its rarity. But it was too late for kindness. The night was already a fortress of cold shoulders and whispered contempt. The weight of all those years, all those sacrifices, came crashing down in a silent storm that no one else seemed to hear. I was just a shadow, and they were all perfectly content seeing me diminished, broken. But I didn't leave. Not yet, because this night, as bitter as it was, marked the edge of a long road, one I'd been walking blindly but was only now beginning to see clearly. The event was their celebration, but for me, it was a reckoning. As the band played on and the smell of spilled drinks mingled with the stale air, I stood still, swallowed the sting of betrayal and humiliation, and started to breathe differently, preparing to face what came next. Part 3. Moment of recognition. The moment hit me like a sudden crack in the sky, a flash of clarity so sharp it almost took my breath away. After years of walking through life like a ghost, invisible and unheard, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the cold light of late afternoon filtering through the grime-smeared window. The silence was dense, pressing against my skin like a weight I'd learned to bear without question. But now, all at once, I felt that weight lift just enough for the truth to slip through. For decades, I had been the woman who sacrificed everything, my dreams, my health, my peace, for others. I thought that was love. I thought it was duty. But that day, as the memories of that humiliating event and the harsh indifference I faced replayed relentlessly in my mind, I saw the truth clearly. I had been used, exploited, unseen, not out of malice, at least not all the time, but because I'd allowed it, because I'd been silent. My hands lay cupped over the worn wooden table, rough from years of hard work, but my mind was racing. Years of bending, giving, disappearing into the needs of others. My husband's dreams, my children's futures, had left me hollow. My own needs were buried so deep I barely remembered what they were. I was invisible, even to myself. I replayed the painful scenes again. The countless times I cancelled plans to care for my sick mother-in-law. The nights spent awake coaxing my son through his storms. The endless chores that chained me to the house. The friends' calls I ignored because I was too busy. I had normalized exhaustion and invisible suffering, convinced that pain for others was enough meaning. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of the pattern. The sacrifices weren't acts of love alone. They were a cycle that kept me small, deferred, dependent. My heart squeezed tight like a fist as this truth unfolded. I'd given so much, yet received so little respect or recognition in return. I saw the tiny cracks in my relationships where my value was dismissed as expected, not earned. The physical ache in my chest deepened, like a cold iron pressing against my ribs. I shivered despite the warm room. My breath quickened, shallow, unsteady as the flood of emotions swept through me. Shame, anger, grief, but also a strange, awakening hope. For a long time I had thought my identity was wrapped up in serving others, that my worth derived only from what I could do for them. That belief was a cage. In this moment, it felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, poised between sinking back into familiar submission or stepping into something unknown. Resting my forehead against the cool kitchen windowpane, I thought about the space I'd given away, my voice, my desires, my time. I realized that in loving others so wholly, I had lost the capacity to love myself. The deepest hurts were not from them, but from the dissolution of my own sense of worth. A pale light filtered in from outside, softening the sharp edges of the room, and I caught sight of a faded photo taped to the fridge. My son as a toddler, his face alight with joy, mine smiling back, full of hope and pride. I traced its outline gently with my fingertip, memories flooding in that now wore a bittersweet tint. All those years of sacrifice had been founded on love. Yes, but love that had to be balanced with self-respect. That fragile picture became a symbol in my mind. It held both my past and a silent question. Who was I beyond being mom, wife, caretaker? What did I want? Not for them, but for myself. The journey home after that event had been a reflective one. Each familiar street and cracked sidewalk conjuring memories I saw anew. I remembered the times I swallowed my pain to avoid conflict. The moments I said yes when my heart screamed no. The nights alone when tears stained my pillow and no one noticed. This night, those memories no longer only brought sorrow. They whispered lessons about strength in endurance, but also the necessity of change. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the cool night air that drifted in through the slightly ajar window. The quiet moment of self-recognition stirred inside me, a struggling seed of courage. The pain of betrayal by neglect was undeniable, but beside it grew something fiercer, a hunger for reclamation. I felt the tired weights on my shoulders begin to shift, no longer chains but stepping stones. The decision was raw and impulsive. I couldn't wait for permission or approval any longer. Tomorrow I would start saying no. Tomorrow I would begin carving space just for me. The path ahead was uncertain. Fear and doubt still whispered their lies, but beneath the swirling storm of emotion was a steady pulse, the undeniable rhythm of newfound will. As I settled into the worn armchair by the window, I felt the shift from helplessness to resolve spreading quietly within me. This moment was not an end, but a beginning. The woman in the mirror, tired yet awake, was ready to claim her life once more. That night, the darkness was no longer suffocating but a soft blanket, enveloping me as I prepared silently for the change yet to come. The morning was crisp, the sky a heavy bruised purple, the sort of dawn that holds its breath, waiting for what comes next. I sat in Colin's car, quiet, letting the quiet stretch between us like a taut wire. He didn't speak much, and Vanessa was busy texting on her phone, her fingers tapping out disinterest. The air inside the vehicle smelled faintly of stale coffee and cheap cologne. We were driving out of the city, leaving the clutter and noise behind, moving toward a place Colin had picked out, a state park known for its clawed rocks and jagged cliffs, a place where hikers vanished without explanation, where the wind whispered secrets no one wanted to hear. I watched the bare trees scrape against the overcast sky as the miles slipped past under me. Their skeletal fingers seemed to claw at my thoughts, reminding me how brittle life had become. Colin's eyes were fixed ahead, his grip tight on the steering wheel. I could feel the growing distance between us, a chasm formed by years of silent betrayals and unspoken wounds. Vanessa suddenly broke the silence with a forced laugh, looping her arm through mine as if trying to anchor us together. "Helen, what are you spacing out for? Come on, don't kill the mood." I smiled softly, a mask of warmth hiding the frigid storm building inside me. "Of course. We're here to relax today, aren't we?" I said, my voice steady but distant. The trail they had chosen wound steeply upward, a punishing curve that made every step a small victory. The forest was thick, the scent of wet earth and pine filling my senses, but failing to calm my restless heart. The crunch of gravel beneath our boots was the only sound besides the occasional bird call, sharp and distant. As we neared a scenic overlook, the last rays of the sun painted the sky a deep red, the kind of color that feels like the end of something, not the beginning. Colin gestured toward a large rock nearby. "Mom, sit down. Take a breather." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a bottle of electrolyte drink, handing it to me. "Thought it might help you recharge." I accepted it with a nod but didn't drink. Holding the bottle just so, I let the liquid sway back and forth without a sip. Something in the exchange vibrated unspoken between us, a silent reckoning. Vanessa giggled, a sound sharp and brittle. "That was way too easy," she said with smug delight, clearly unaware of what I'd already deduced. Colin's voice turned cold, the edge sharper than ever. "Sorry, Mom, but I really need that insurance money." I sank down, letting my body go limp, collapsing onto the rock as if it was the bed I never had. They expected an easy mark, something to be drained and discarded, but I wasn't a victim anymore. As darkness folded over the land, the chill deepened, seeping into my bones. As I began moving again, descending step by measured step, each footfall was a silent vow, a reclaiming of my stride and my destiny. The night air was sharp with warning. Wild animals prowled these trails, and the falling temperature was a reminder that survival was not guaranteed. Just before I reached the trailhead, faint cries cut through the dimming light, weak, broken sounds that clawed at the silence. I followed the noise carefully through the thick brush to find a man, his face pale and eyes glazed from pain, an injured leg preventing him from moving. He looked to be roughly my age, trembling as he looked at me and whispered, "Can you call for help?" I didn't hesitate. I dialed emergency services and stayed at his side until the ambulance arrived, the weight of this moment grounding my swirling thoughts. Back at the house, the scene was starkly different. Colin and Vanessa sat at the dining table, eating breakfast without any hint of remorse. Vanessa dragged her manicured nails against her plate, the scraping grating like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Have either of you seen Goofy?" I forced my voice to be steady as I asked, my fingertips trembling. Colin didn't even look up. Chewing lazily, he waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, the dog. Took him out this morning and dumped him somewhere." The words hit me like a fist. My ears rang. My stomach twisted violently. "You what?" I gasped, my voice breaking. He shrugged, completely unbothered. "It was just an old mutt always getting in the way. Figured the house would be a lot quieter without him." The cold indifference in his eyes was a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I remembered how Goofy had been my anchor in the storm, the one constant companion in a life marked by relentless sacrifice. Now they had taken him away, tossing my love aside like trash. Vanessa chimed in casually, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin. "Honestly, Helen, you should be thanking Colin. He did you a favor." I stood frozen, my gaze drifting to the coffee table. An old photo lay there, faded but vivid in my memory. Me, holding a giggling Goofy in my arms, a smile radiant with a love I thought was unbreakable. The sunlight streamed in through the windows, yet I had never felt colder. The cruelty settled like a dark void in my chest, swallowing every flicker of warmth. In that moment, clarity struck with brutal force. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about everything I had given for years, and the ruthless way it had been discarded. Colin wasn't just indifferent, he was cruel. Vanessa's betrayal was the betrayal of every promise. I realized then, standing at the edge of despair, that the story we had been writing was over. I would no longer be the woman who sacrificed endlessly, the one who tolerated being invisible and unappreciated. I would rise from this, not with anger alone, but with steady, unshakable resolve. They had underestimated me. That day marked the first step of breaking free, calculated, calm, and cold in its intent. The journey back inside the house was a study in quiet defiance. As I moved through the rooms, I gathered my strength in the silence, turning over plans with the precision of a chess player setting the board. The house, once a place of sorrow, now felt like the battlefield where I would reclaim my life. I began with a small act. I returned the keys to the house to Colin, along with a letter, carefully crafted and devoid of emotion. It outlined every cent they had spent during their luxury trip to Thailand, not from my savings, but from Colin's own credit line, maxed out to the limit. Every dollar accounted for, a final invoice demanding repayment. No confrontation, no yelling, just the quiet assertion of boundaries long ignored. Their shock was palpable. The arrogance with which they had taken my kindness for granted now met with unwavering resolve. Vanessa's face, once glowing with entitlement, paled as she scanned the documents. Colin's fists clenched in disbelief. The man who once acted like a prince now reduced to a cornered animal. Yet even in that moment of triumph, a brief shadow of doubt flickered within me. Was I doing the right thing? Was this cold calculus truly the path to freedom? But the doubt quickly dissolved, replaced by the steady flame of determination. I was no longer a victim waiting for rescue. I was the author of my own fate, the keeper of my own peace. That small act, the delivery of the invoice and the keys, became the symbol of my new beginning. It was the line drawn in the sand, the subtle, revolutionary act that told Colin and Vanessa their time of taking without consequences was over. Through that quiet gesture, I reclaimed space not just in this house, but in my own life. The mountain trail behind me was steep and cold, but life ahead was uncharted territory. I stepped forward, ready for all that awaited. Amanda stopped leaving messages. She started texting instead, short ones. "Hey, can we talk? I really need you." Then silence again. Meanwhile, I watched the bank statements roll in. ML Holdings was stable, profitable even. The other tenants were quiet, respectful, and paid on time. It was only Chad making noise, and Amanda caught in a storm. But things changed when I received the quarterly report from the building manager. Attached were photos of Chad and Amanda's unit. The bathroom had mildew, kitchen tiles cracked, mail stacking up on the floor. They were cutting corners, living lean. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about rent, it was about power. And Chad was losing it fast. Word around the building was he'd started taking on extra hours at work. Amanda was seen crying on the back steps one afternoon by another tenant. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I didn't have to say a single word. That was the part I kept coming back to. For so long, I was the one begging to be heard, begging Amanda to see what Chad was, to see what she was becoming, by standing beside him. Now they were choking on their own silence, and I was watching from above, literally. My new apartment overlooked their courtyard, in a different building, on a higher floor, in a safer neighborhood, a view they could never afford. I didn't watch them all the time, just enough to remember that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that what they did to me deserved consequences. And yet, despite all that, some nights I still found myself sitting by the window, holding my phone, staring at Amanda's last message. "I really need you." The woman inside me, the mother, ached. But the woman I had become, she knew this was only the beginning. I always thought heartbreak came in loud moments, slamming doors, shouted words, public scenes. But the real heartbreak, it's quiet. It comes in the form of a voicemail you don't return, a message left unread, the silence between you and someone who once called you Mommy. The calls from Amanda stopped, the texts slowed, but the damage on her end only seemed to grow. From what I gathered through the building staff, the tension in their apartment had turned into open hostility. Chad was snipping at everyone, refusing maintenance requests and demanding unnecessary inspections, looking for someone to blame. Amanda, I was told, looked like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't rejoice. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about something far more painful, watching the daughter I raised willingly stay in a cage and call it love. One afternoon, my property manager sent over a report after a noise complaint. The neighbor downstairs had heard a heated argument, shouting something about losing control and, "This is all your fault." Chad had stormed out and didn't come back until the next morning. Amanda stayed locked inside the apartment the whole night. Lights off, curtains closed. I waited, not for Chad, for her. Amanda tried to call me 2 days after the notice. It was the first time she reached out since the night I left. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up like a lot. Chad's losing it. I don't know. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about gravity. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. I drove by the building once late at night. Their lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Amanda pacing, Chad yelling, his silhouette unmistakable. I watched them for a minute, then drove away. Part of me felt hollow. Part of me felt vindicated. And part of me still hurt like hell. Because even now, knowing what I knew, holding what I held, I would have given anything to be invited back in. Not to the apartment, but to my daughter's heart. But I knew that wasn't possible. At least not yet. So I stayed silent, and I waited because sometimes the loudest justice is the one that doesn't say a word. And I wasn't finished yet. I didn't realize how much I had changed until I saw Amanda at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent increase. She didn't see me. I was 2 aisles over, hidden behind a rack of discounted cereal. She looked tired. Not just tired, worn down. Her hair was tied back sloppily, the way she used to do when she'd been crying. Her cart was half empty, mostly cheap staples. Rice, eggs, a few off-brand cans. I should have walked away. I didn't. I followed her through the store at a distance, heart pounding like I was doing something wrong. She paused in front of a small box of mac and cheese, then looked down at her phone. A text from Chad, maybe. Her shoulders sank. She put the box back. That moment broke me. Not because I pitied her, but because I remembered the little girl who used to run to me crying when she scraped her knee. The one who asked me every night to check for monsters under her bed. And now she was living with one. I drove home that day and sat on the couch in silence for hours. I stared at the window thinking about how life had twisted us into strangers. But I reminded myself this wasn't punishment. This was consequence, and consequence was long overdue. I had plans now. Not just the building, but a quiet, slow chess match. Every move calculated, every step thoughtful. With the LLC fully in place and the property legally transferred, I started repairs. Small ones at first. Leaks, broken locks, flickering lights. Chad never noticed. He was too distracted by the rent increase, yelling at the property manager by email, demanding answers. But I knew him, knew how his ego worked. He'd become so used to being in control that the idea of answering to a faceless landlord drove him mad. Amanda tried calling me again that same night. The voicemail was different. No pretense. "Mom, I know you're not picking up, but I really need to talk to you. Things are rough right now. Chad's upset. He's taking it out on everything. We're trying to figure things out. I miss you. I do." Her voice cracked at the end. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the screen. I could call her back, tell her it would be okay, that I'd fix everything. But I didn't because it wasn't okay, and I couldn't keep fixing the messes she helped make. Amanda had let him throw me out like I was nothing more than a bill they couldn't afford. And now that the pressure was on her, she remembered how to dial my number. No, let her sit with the silence a little longer. The next week, I authorized additional upgrades on the property. New exterior paint, hallway lighting, landscaping improvements. Chad's rent wasn't just a punishment. It was funding improvements for the other tenants. That was the irony. Everyone else benefited. He just couldn't see it. He began leaving angry notes under the office door. "The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke." Every note went unanswered. Amanda stopped leaving messages. She started texting instead. Short ones. "Hey, can we talk? I really need you." Then silence again. Meanwhile, I watched the bank statements roll in. ML Holdings was stable, profitable even. The other tenants were quiet, respectful, and paid on time. It was only Chad making noise, and Amanda caught in a storm. But things changed when I received the quarterly report from the building manager. Attached were photos of Chad and Amanda's unit. The bathroom had mildew, kitchen tiles cracked, mail stacking up on the floor. They were cutting corners, living lean. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about rent, it was about power. And Chad was losing it fast. Word around the building was he'd started taking on extra hours at work. Amanda was seen crying on the back steps one afternoon by another tenant. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I didn't have to say a single word. That was the part I kept coming back to. For so long, I was the one begging to be heard, begging Amanda to see what Chad was, to see what she was becoming by standing beside him. Now they were choking on their own silence, and I was watching from above, literally. My new apartment overlooked their courtyard. Different building, higher floor, safer neighborhood, a view they could never afford. I didn't watch them all the time, just enough to remember that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that what they did to me deserved consequences. And yet, despite all that, some nights I still found myself sitting by the window, holding my phone, staring at Amanda's last message. I really need you. The woman inside me, the mother, ached. But the woman I had become? She knew this was only the beginning. One night, there was a soft knock on my door. The silence I'd been living in felt like a storm, crouched in the distance, waiting. I opened the door. Amanda stood there, soaked from the rain, a grocery bag clutched to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were red, and her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked like she had run out of words days ago. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, dripping water on the hardwood floor. I handed her a towel, and we moved without speaking. I warmed the kettle and poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She sat on the edge of the couch like she didn't want to stay long, like she didn't deserve to. Maybe she didn't. She stared into her cup, eyes hollow. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally. I stayed quiet. I knew. Part of me always knew. But I told myself it was stress, that he just needed support, that if I was patient, he'd come around. Still, I said nothing. She looked up, voice trembling. "He thinks someone's targeting us. He's obsessed. He's been going through my phone, my emails. Last week, he followed me to work. Said he was making sure I wasn't involved. Asked if I was hiding something. If you were hiding something." That caught my breath. She didn't wait for an answer. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks, that I didn't even know where you were." She paused. But that was a lie. I met her eyes for the first time. "I found your building listed in a security notice. Same management company." I figured it out. It wasn't hard. Of course it wasn't. Amanda was smart. Always had been. But smart doesn't always mean brave. And now, she looked like someone who had finally opened her eyes and hated what she saw. "I didn't speak. Not yet. I miss you. But I don't even know how to be around you anymore." My hand tightened around the mug. "You left," she said, voice cracking. "And I let you. I let him push you out." Finally, I spoke. "No, Amanda, you didn't let him. You stood with him." That stopped her cold. This was the turning point. I saw my daughter not as the girl who pushed me away, but as someone lost in the wreckage of a broken love and shattered trust. We didn't speak much that night, but there was a shift. A tiny crack in the wall that had been built between us. Weeks passed. The rent increase stood. The new rules remained. But now, the silence had a new weight. Not the weight of resignation, but of challenge. Amanda didn't call every day. She didn't ask for everything. She started setting limits. Small ones. She cooked her meals more often. Tried to save what she could. I watched from a distance. Still wary, but hopeful. Chad's presence faded, just as it should. I wasn't there for her to run back to when things got hard anymore. Now, I was waiting for her to find her own strength. And so was she, because this was no longer about control. It was about reclaiming lives, hers and mine. No more pleas, no more sacrifices. Just a slow, steady rebuilding from the ruins of what was broken. I was ready to listen when she wanted to speak, but only on her terms. The battle wasn't over, but I had won the first and most important war, the one within myself. I was no longer the woman who sacrificed everything for others' happiness. I was as a woman who demanded respect and gave it when earned. And if Chad and Amanda couldn't understand that, it was their loss. Because this time, I had the power, and I was not afraid to use it. That night, alone in the dim light of her small kitchen, Marie sat cold and trembling, with a mix of fear and determination gnawing at her. Her opponents had not given up. Calls, texts, and even an unexpected visit from Peter, her once close friend, who had now become a messenger of guilt and manipulation. Each approach was like a wave trying to drag her back into the dark undertow she was fighting to escape. But tonight, something shifted inside her. As she sipped the bitter coffee she barely tasted, her hand brushed against the drawer, and something metallic caught her eye. She instinctively opened it. There, beneath the clutter of pens, unread bills and receipts, lay an old folded envelope. It was given to her years ago but forgotten, tucked away and hidden by time and neglect. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, spidery and hurried. The ink faded but still legible. Her heart quickened. For years she had lived by sacrifices, by bending to the will of others, especially her son. Questions she never dared ask stubbornly insisted on being answered now. She unfolded the weathered paper. Inside was a letter, an explanation from her late husband, written hurriedly in the days before he'd left their home and shattered her world. The words revealed a secret long buried. Her son's real father was not the man she had mourned and honored for decades, but someone else. A betrayal that altered the narrative she had built around her life with a single crushing stroke. Tears sprang to her eyes, not just from the betrayal, but from a strange sense of relief. The letter told of lies painstakingly maintained, of guilt and deception her husband had carried alone. Her pain mixed with an uneasy gratitude. Here was the truth that had been hidden, the roots of the patterns that shaped her suffering and submission. The discovery reframed everything she thought she knew, from the sacrifices she made to the relationships she kept. It was as if a heavy veil lifted from her chest, allowing her to breathe, even as it stung. She remembered moments long buried, the conversations she'd had with her husband, his distant eyes, his hurried explanations, the nights she wondered why her son was so different, so restless, the subtle avoidance when she asked about family history, the fragments of doubt she'd ignored for so long, folding them away as inconvenient shadows of her otherwise steadfast faith in her marriage. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines of the letter, each word a key unlocking a door she hadn't dared to open before. The pain was real, but as the night deepened and the air grew cool, a new clarity settled within her. She was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows of a false story. Now, armed with truth, she felt the stirrings of power, not from vengeance, but from the knowledge that her life could be her own to command. With the letter clutched to her chest, she found herself rising and moving to the window. Outside, the first hints of dawn blurred the dark. She inhaled deeply. The weight on her shoulders shifted, lightened by understanding, by recognition that the past, though painful, did not have to define her future, that this revelation, painful as it was, could be the key to unlocking her heart and stepping into a life authentic and free. She spent the following hours in quiet reflection. The isolation that had once been suffocating now felt like a protective cocoon, a space where she could gather strength. The storm within her raged before settling into a firm resolve. She would no longer allow herself to be bound by lies or sacrifice for the sake of others' illusions. She was reclaiming her story, piece by piece. And though the path ahead was uncertain, the shadows of doubt began to clear, replaced by a fierce, sparkling clarity born from the hardest lessons life had thrown at her. The letter was not just a revelation of betrayal. It was a lifeline, a message that the cycle could end, and with that, her rebirth could begin. Part 7, Final Confrontation and Liberation. Standing in the dimly lit room, I felt the air thick with years of unsaid words and bottled-up pain. The walls, once vibrant with memories, now wore the weary masks of neglect and anger, shadows crawling through the cracks. Across from me, he sat in his worn armchair, a figure of authority that had once dictated every fiber of my existence. But tonight, something had shifted. I was no longer the shadow cast behind his light. I took a deep breath, steadying the tremor in my chest. My hands trembled slightly but clenched into fists, grounding me. "I'm done," I said, voice low yet unwavering, carrying the weight of every sacrifice, every silent tear, every masked smile. The words hung heavy in the stale air. His eyes narrowed, disbelief flickering almost imperceptibly. "Done?" His voice was rough, laced with disbelief and anger. "Do you realize what you're saying? After all I've done for you, all I've sacrificed?" A bitter laugh escaped me, dry, without humor. "What you've done for me was take my voice, my dreams, my very self, and call it sacrifice. For decades, I gave everything, stepping back so you could shine. And what did I become? Invisible, forgotten, a ghost in my own life." He shifted, the hard lines of control flickering with frustration. "You owe me. You can't just walk away. It's selfish, ungrateful." I met his gaze, not with pleading, but with quiet fury. "I owe you nothing anymore." My words cut through the tension like a blade, severe and irrevocable. "I sacrificed myself for your ambitions, gave up friends, career, and even love, all for the family you pretended to cherish. But you never saw me. You used me." His face contorted in anger, then desperation. "You're crazy. You're just hurting yourself. And those who care about you." The mention of care twisted the knife in my chest. Care? When was the last time he bothered with what I wanted? My mind replayed every moment of neglect, every dismissive comment, every time my pain was silenced. The realization struck hard. This man never truly cared for me. He cared only for control. "No," I said softly, but with a steel edge. "You're the one who's been hurting us both, and I've been carrying this burden alone." My voice rose with every word, burning with the rage long suppressed. "I see the secret you tried to hide, the lies buried beneath years of silence. But those lies won't bind me anymore." He flinched, the weight of my revelation breaking through his carefully built armor. "What lies? You think you know everything?" I nodded, stepping closer, the space between us shrinking with each breath. "I do. The truths buried in letters, half-truths whispered behind closed doors, the betrayals you thought I'd never discover. I carry the proof now." I reached into my bag, pulling out the crumpled papers, evidence of the deceit hidden beneath decades of sacrifice. His hands clenched the arms of the chair, knuckles white. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You're destroying everything. This family, our life. Why? Because I'm choosing myself for once." I felt a surge of power as I said it. The words freeing chains I didn't know bound me so tightly. Not for revenge or punishment, but for my own survival. He looked up at me, eyes glassy, searching for cracks in my resolve. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what the world is like without me." I shook my head, a slow, deliberate motion. "I know what it's like with you, and it's suffocating. But now, I'm breathing again." The room, once oppressive, felt lighter, the stale air slowly replaced by the spark of something new. Hope. There was a long silence, the kind that stretches and tightens all at once. Then he spoke, voice softer, almost broken. "Please, don't do this. We can fix it." Looking down, I saw the worn floorboards, their scratches like scars telling years of history. I had spent so long trying to fix us, only to be broken more. Now it was my turn. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't about fixing what was never whole. It's about building something different, something real." "For me?" I turned, my footsteps steady and certain on the creaking floor. The dull scent of old leather and faded perfume lingered, but I no longer felt weighed down by it. Every step away was a reclaiming of space that I had lost so long ago. As I reached the threshold, I looked back once, not with bitterness but with quiet strength. "This is where I end the story you wrote for me. From now on, I am the author." The door closed softly behind me, a final punctuation mark on the chapter that bound me, and the beginning of the story I was ready to write in light. My heart, once heavy, now lifted by the fragile but fierce hope of freedom. Freedom to breathe, to live, to be me. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain and earth, the promise of new beginnings. The night was still, vast and open, a canvas waiting for the colors of my rebirth. I inhaled deeply, the weight lifted, and whispered into the quiet. "I am free." And in that moment, under the wide, endless sky, I was. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the small room I now called my own. It wasn't much, just a modest apartment nestled on the third floor of a weathered building. But to me, it symbolized the fragile yet resolute foundation of my rebirth. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee, mingling with the subtle scent of blooming jasmine from the balcony, a stark contrast to the stale, suffocating environment I had left behind. Here, every breath felt freer, lighter, as if the weight that had once anchored my spirit to years of sacrifice had finally lifted. Sitting at the worn wooden table, I held a small amber jar cradled between my hands. Inside was a blend of dried lavender and chamomile, a ritual I had begun last night, an offering to myself, a promise made in silence. I wasn't sure who I was before I decided to break away, but I was beginning to understand who I could become. Slowly, I sprinkled the fragrant herbs into a shallow bowl, lit a candle beside it, and allowed the smoke to curl upward, its tendrils carrying away the shadows of doubt and pain. The simple act rooted me in the present, a quiet ceremony that acknowledged the tumultuous journey, yet embraced the possibility of peace. Outside, laughter drifted in from the neighbors. A dog barked cheerfully. Distant music played softly. These sounds didn't remind me of isolation, but rather connection, tiny threads weaving into a new tapestry, one that I could shape with my own hands. In this fresh space, I no longer wore the heavy cloak of invisibility. I was seen, not for what I had done for others, but for who I was becoming. Today I met Carla in the small cafe down the street, a lively woman with eyes that held stories of their own. She greeted me with an easy smile that didn't expect anything in return. Over warm cups of tea we talked. Not about sacrifices or burdens, but about dreams, books, the quirky art that adorned the city walls. I realized then how rare it was to find someone who listened without judgment, who valued me without conditions. It was a small, fragile spark, but a spark nonetheless. Each day since the confrontation that severed old ties, I've been sketching quietly in the margins of a notebook, a habit I hadn't dared indulge in years. The lines I draw are shaky, yet brimming with intention, like tentative steps on a new path. They are my declarations of autonomy, little victories traced on blank pages. Sometimes I catch my reflection and hardly recognize the woman looking back, eyes steadier, shoulders freer, a tentative smile playing at the edges of her lips. The transformation isn't complete, nor does it boast of sudden grandeur. It moves like the tide, gradual and unstoppable, eroding walls built by years of imposed silence. Financial independence still eludes me, but I no longer equate money with worth or freedom with wealth. I'm learning to value the richness of moments, quiet mornings like this, fresh conversations, the soothing rhythm of self-care. The cluttered house that once echoed with neglect has been replaced by a single room, suffused with warmth and possibility. I painted the walls a soft, sage green, a color I chose because it felt like a breath of fresh air, a balm for the soul. I walk these new streets with a lighter step, the burdens once chained to my ankles replaced by the steady beat of my own heartbeat. Sometimes I look back, but not to dwell. Instead, I acknowledge the scars as maps etched by lived experience, reminders of the woman who endured, who survived, and who ultimately reclaimed her story. The path ahead remains uncertain, peppered with shadows and surprises, but for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid to face it alone. In the quiet of my small sanctuary, I whisper to the woman I once was, and the one I am becoming. I am here. I am enough. I am free. This is no longer a question or a plea, but a declaration, a final thread that sews together the torn fabric of my past with the vibrant tapestry of my future. And so I begin again, not from zero, but from the strength of every step that led me here, a rebirth woven from the fragile, fierce light of my own choosing.